So hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Cecile, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at Close Reach. We are very pleased to present today's webinar, The Myths of Business Architecture, with Roger Burlton. As we get started, we have some quick housekeeping and introductions to do, and then we'll pass things over to Roger, and he will take us through today's presentation. Whether you've joined today's webinar in browser mode or downloaded the desktop app, you have access to some GoToTraining controls. Please keep your mic on mute to minimize the background noise, as we have quite a large group today. However, we do want this to be interactive, so I will be moderating the chat for comments and questions, and Roger will pause periodically to respond. He also has some built-in things in his presentation to get some audience engagement as well. We've also allowed time at the end of the presentation for a general discussion and Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available to those who registered, as well as being posted on our website, so feel free to share with your friends and colleagues. So a little about Close Reach. For those of you who don't know us, we are enterprise architecture and quality and compliance management experts and are based in Ottawa, Canada. We have partnered with two industry-leading software vendors, Qualiware and Ivanti, and provide advisory and consulting services, software and training to private and public sector organizations across Canada and the US. You can visit our website, closereach.ca, to find out more information about us. Roger Burlton, of course, is our featured speaker today, and I'm sure you all know him. Roger's an internationally regarded expert and author, and is well known for his pragmatic approach to business architecture practices. Roger recently authored a new book, Collecting, Connecting, and Correcting the Dots, and you will see some more information about that later in the presentation. In today's session, Roger will take us through a journey from dashed hopes to realistic alternatives that can be trusted to deliver. He promises there will be some controversy. So with that, I'll hand things over to you, Roger.
Thanks, Cecile. So what I want to talk about today is the idea that whenever we get a new approach or something which is starting to become popular in the marketplace, everybody jumps in and everybody tries to claim the space. And what I've discovered is that when we get to things like business architecture, there's a lot of academic thoughts around some of this. And there's a lot of very old thoughts that have been supplanted by better ideas and new ideas. And so when I was talking to Close Reach a few weeks ago, I said, well, and we had just run a training class with 20 people virtually. We said, well, let's run that again. So she said, well, what can we talk about just to help people get some idea of some of the things they're going to be looking at? We said, well, let's run a webinar. So I said, well, what can we do something different? So we said, well, you know, there are a lot of myths around business architecture, a lot of things that people think are true and think are the ways to do it, and think that these things actually work, where when you sort of get into it and you start to do it, you find it maybe didn't work quite as well as we wanted to. And there are lots of myths about business architecture which don't really give you the optimal capability to be able to actually do it. So I said, well, let's do some of this. So I said, okay, fine. I'm going to put out my experience, my experience of my clients who have been doing this work for a while, as to really what works and what doesn't work. So I'm going to go through a number of things that I've picked, and hopefully as we get towards the end, we can sort of open it up and say, do you have any that you want to add to this list? What are some of the things that we can sort of think about just to sort of ground us in ways or practices that work better than some others? And I guarantee you some of this will be controversial. Some of you are going to disagree with me, and that's perfectly okay. But as we're going, please pop your questions or pop your objections or whatever they may be into the chat, and we'll monitor those and bring them up. And I'm happy to sort of have a discussion about what those particular items are. So without sort of much further ado, let's really get into it. So I think just the first one, and I'm going to jump right into it right after this slide. The question is, why are we doing business architecture in the first place? Is this just some other way to sort of rebrand enterprise architecture? Is it something different? Is it just another way of looking at what we've always done? Is this just another form of business analysis? There's a lot of really, really good questions. But what I would say is, if you look at sort of the outcome that we're looking for, is really, we want to do business architecture because we want to make sure when we design the business, because it really comes back to designing the business, that any design we have is going to deliver optimal value for the prime stakeholders of the business. And those will be the people who receive our services, the people you might call customers, depending upon the industry you're in, or citizens if you're in the government type of work. But why are we here? We're here to deliver value. We have a mission for our organization to deliver that value. And that can be for any, it doesn't have to be for profit, it can be for any type of organization at all, as long as you can define your value. Then the other thing we want to be able to do is make sure that as an organization, we remain flexible. If somebody has their
I apologize. There's someone, yeah, I'm sorry about that.
the,
I think it might be someone who's just joined on the phone. If they can please mute themselves.
Thank you. The second thing we want to be able to do is we want to remain agile. I'm not talking about agile software development. I'm talking about business agility, the ability to sort of change quickly, to move when conditions change in the outside world, because in that business ecosystem, things are happening fast and furious as we are now. So a good business architecture allows us to make changes without disrupting everything. And also, the other thing we really want to make sure we do is we allocate our scarce resources in the best possible way. So rather than doing I can tell you, I'm working with an organization, and I'm in Vancouver, but I'm working with an organization in Sydney, Australia right now. And yesterday in a meeting, part of the architectural team said, we've just identified 22 projects working on this one value stream. And with the realization, first of all, that it's not going to work because you can't possibly do that. But secondarily, I now have 22 teams working on something where maybe I could have had one. So the scarce resources is going to be an important issue as well. So this is what we're going to try to, what we want to get out of the business architecture, very, very simply. So let's sort of dive in, and we're going to talk. These are some of the myths we're going to talk about. We'll tackle them one at a time. So it's the issue about business architecture and strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And that's the first two things, especially the second one is so many people think business architecture is only there so we can do IT better, so we can define what to build. We'll talk about that. There's modeling. I mean, whenever we get into architecture, we are going to end up talking about modeling. And so then one of my favorites is, well, we're doing agile software development. We don't need a business architecture. It's just going to slow us down. Then another thing we see is, well, we're doing something. We're doing a process map. We're doing a capability map. We're doing one of these things, so therefore that's business architecture for us. And I'm gonna fight that perception, I think. Sixth one we're gonna talk about is concept modeling, which we're discovering is becoming incredibly important. But a lot of people say, don't bother, we know what we're doing. We know what the business is all about. Another thing we'll find is this whole issue around capabilities and process. This debate has been going on for more than a decade, and we still don't really understand what the differences are and how they actually fit together. At least a lot of people don't. The idea that value streams and processes are different things. And also we're going to talk a little bit about the executives, with the idea that their statements should tell us what to do. Yeah, well, maybe not. So we'll talk about prioritization or heat mapping, and we'll just say, well, we've got a pain, let's fix it. And I'm also going to touch base on measurement, because measurement is sort of one thing that I believe holds everything together. It's traceable from beginning to end, or at least it should be. And the last point is, all you need is a good methodology, follow all the steps, and that's going to tell you what you have to do. So these are some of the things I really want to tackle. We're going to take them one at a time. You can provide your feedback as we're going, right? So basically then the next slide we're going to talk about is that business architecture, connecting to the front end. Business architecture does not cover strategy, but connects to it. Well, there's a certain amount of truth in that the business architect is not there to develop the organizational strategy. But if we sort of think about strategy as ends and means, or intentions and then the ability or the critical success factors to deliver against those things, then all of a sudden business architecture itself is strategy, because strategic intent is what we try to aim for, but strategy is how are we going to deliver on that strategic intent. So therefore, your business architect, if you're doing business architecture, you are helping the organization figure out strategically what it's going to do in order to realize those ends in the first place. It's also a strong argument which basically says that that really, in my perfect world, the business architecture should be sitting in with the strategy people or awfully close to them, and not in IT. Okay, not that IT won't get some benefit from it, but it's not in IT. So basically, we sort of look at our major framework. We talk about defining the business, designing the business, building the business, and then operating the business. And in defining the business, we do have a business model. How are we going to do work? Are we going to work through partners? Are we going to work directly? How will we actually achieve our mission? We will look at the where we sit in the world. What pressures do we get from the outside? What opportunities are coming at us from the outside? We'll look at the external stakeholders, and the external stakeholders will be all those people on the outside who we're serving or who are serving us, and the people we have to depend upon. So this external set of perspectives is absolutely critical. For the most part, we can't do much about it, but we have to sort of go with it unless we can influence it somehow. And then out of all of that, we basically will basically derive a North Star. A North Star is what are we going to use to guide our prioritization? What are we going to use to guide the determination of a good design from a poor design? So that North Star is going to be absolutely critical. And also what we're going to find is we're going to need to understand that if I have this North Star, what are my strategic requirements? I'll give you an example of this. An organization we work with said, the manufacturing distribution organization of food products, and the head office came to the Canadian operations and said, your mission within the or your charter within the next 5 years is to double the size of your business, double the revenue. So double the revenue, but they looked at it and said, but the marketplace is only growing at 2% per year. If you want to double the revenue, we have to do 15% per year, compounded over 5 years. Well, that's great. So that was the intention. They were given that and they couldn't do anything else about it. So they had to find a way. So then we said, well, okay, well, what are the strategic requirements in order to be able to do that? And they said, well, 2 things. They decided on 2 things. They had to bring new products to market in new categories. And number 2, they had to acquire competitors. So they put an acquisition strategy in place and things like that. So strategic requirements are the critical success factors in order to hit our North Star. Now, a lot of people say that out of all of this, and I'm hearing a lot of this lately, is OKRs, basically the objectives and the key results. that people are aiming for. And we say, well, that's okay. You know, what should we be doing? But we typically find is they're not crystallized enough for us as architects. We need to be more specific on exactly what it is, what success looks like. Then we can actually figure out what kind of information do we have to provision, what kind of processes and value streams do we have to have, what capabilities do we have to build, and how are we going to measure all that to make sure everything we do is traceable back up to the business model and to the North Star. So these choices in here are strategic choices. That is strategy. So I'm going to make the claim the business architecture is not just supporting strategy, it is actually part of the strategy of the organization. So therefore, as architects, we have to be much more involved with the stuff that's happening up front. Now, hopefully you find that good news, as opposed to we just respond to it perfectly, not perfectly, but very ill-defined goals and objectives that come out of this. And quite often what happens otherwise is if you don't have this as part of strategy, then ignore this design the business block. What we find is we do things like a SWOT analysis and we find a weakness, so therefore we'll do a project. We find an opportunity, so we'll do a project. And this is how I end up with 22 projects, all covering the same thing in that phone company. I'll give it away, the phone company in Australia. So anybody, can I get some thumbs up? Can I get some, I'm not even sure I can see the thumbs up. But,
I might be able to see them. Oh, we have hands.
Okay, hand is a question. Let's have a question or an observation.
Oh, wait now. As soon as we said that, they took their hand down.
Sorry about that.
Maybe the hand up was a thumbs up. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but
okay.
you can also comment in the chat, folks, so we can see that as well.
I think this one is something that all business architects would welcome, because if you've done any business architecture, you know you can't just start knocking off things that have to be done if you don't know the intention and the value and the outcome that's associated with doing it. And so I think that's going to be important. And that's, by the way, it's also critical. If I'm going to do prioritization, I'm going to figure out what goes first, second, third, and what the prioritization is. And if I'm going to do things like heat mapping, if I don't have my North Star very crystal clear, then I'm going to have all kinds of opinions sitting over here. I have no criteria to determine prioritization other than a bunch of people's opinions, all of whom are fighting each other for power and control. So I see it. Okay, I see it now. Ray. Oh, hi, Ray. What was that? It disappeared on me.
That's okay. Roger, Ray's asking how one goes about facilitating prioritization with senior executives.
Okay, well, we're going to come to prioritization, so if you just hang on a little bit, and I'll talk about that, right? So, but here's the thing. If you don't get the executives on the same page with regard to the North Star, it will be a battle of wills and power and control, right? Richard, hello, Richard. So we're going to talk about that one too, processes and value streams, and what are they, right? So if strategic objectives aren't measurable and purposely vague, well, then good luck. This is what I'm really saying, is that you have, as a business architect, if they're not clear, you are going to interpret all that lack of clarity and basically build out your understanding of how this comes in, and where you've got something much more specific to work with. It's in your interest to get this clear, and most of the time it's not. So that is going to be something that we're going to have to basically take on. Okay, let's so basically what I'm saying is these are the ends, these are the means, right? So in strategy work, if you look at the business motivation model, which is a really good way of looking at this, is an OMG standard now. Business motivation model always says ends before means. But what we often do is we often end up with a whole bunch of goals and objectives and initiatives built around the means, but the means themselves are only a way of getting to the ends. And if we're not clear on the ends, how do you know what the right means are? And I know we've all sort of struggled with that one. We know we're doing projects, we're really not really sure why and what the outcomes truly are. So business architecture is a strategic issue as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Now,
there's also a comment, Roger, from Riley. It's a shame when there's the systems perspective versus the business perspective divide. It's treated as though they have to be separate.
Yeah, well, this is part of the next one, right? Business architecture. Some people think that business architecture is about interpreting strategy so that we can do IT. Now, clearly, how do I look at the ends? The ends, there can be a financial aspect of it, but I don't want it leading with financial, right? But you quite often do find financial statements. I don't want it to only be financial. I want statements there that deal with customers and markets and all what does success look like for our customers? What does success look like for our employees? I want it stakeholder based, more than just financially, right? So this one says business architecture is about interpreting strategy to define what IT should build. I know that's where most of the money goes, but we're not only doing business architecture so we can build the right systems. We're doing it so we can change the business so the business will be successful. So one of the things we'll look for there is many of you have seen this many times, is the idea that if you truly want the organization to be capable of doing better things, optimize that. Yes, technology is a part of it, but the human aspect, the competencies are part of it. Depending upon the world you're in, for example, in Gail Peterson's world, who's on, it's a lot about facilities and equipment and so on. If you're a heavy industry type of organization, this becomes incredibly important too. It can definitely be the issue of your policies and your decisions, your business rules are going to probably have to change if you really want to be truly capable, as opposed to just automating things for the sake of it. Your organizational structure could be affected. In other words, you might have the wrong roles, the wrong incentives, the wrong performance drivers, which is sitting in the middle. And the question is whether or not the organizational incentives are in synchronization with the performance for the recipients of the service. This is a huge, huge issue. That we all agree we want to deliver value to our stakeholders, but then we look at how people are motivated and measured internally, and it's completely out of whack. And it's no surprise when we don't get the right motivation of individuals to match that up. And of course, are we in sync with where the strategy goes? A large part of this is going to be business process, which I'm using the term very generically here for the whole stack from value chain to value streams to processes. And it's all about information. But let's not forget this one here. If your culture is all screwed up, then it doesn't matter what you do with everything else out here. The behavior is not going to happen. So it's not just about IT. Yes, IT needs it, but so do a bunch of other people. And when we're going to go for implementation or even design, we have to design this to be balanced with each other and not just to throw in technology. You know what you don't want? You don't want the Loblaw situation. If anybody knows this, and by the way, this is public information printed in the Globe and Mail a few years back. Loblaw spent $2.2 billion implementing SAP. $2.2 billion. But they didn't do these other things. And it, by the way, took them 7 years. And it even took them to the point where as soon as they finished it, now at this point in time, they finished it, but then SAP's got a new release and they're screwed, right? So, the point being is when we're doing our work, if we truly are business architects, we're going to architect the business, not just the IT. Now, if you're going towards service-oriented architecture, things like that, yes, this will definitely help you. But you're not the only recipients, and we're not only doing it for you. And if you're not considering the other stuff, then you're not really, truly a business architect. Now that's a very controversial statement as well. Anyone want to take this one on? Oh, well, that was not as controversial as I thought it would be.
Everybody's very quiet all of a sudden.
Yeah, because it's too close to home. And I think, again, not that you won't get advantage by doing that, you will, but you could easily sub-optimize and you could easily end up with things that won't be implementable. Well, you'll get the software in, but the business aspect of it will not benefit to the degree that you might like. Okay. All right. If there's no, but it's the enterprise architecture that binds it all together. Yes, but what we also see here is if you don't have, so now we're into the issue about what's an enterprise architecture versus what's a business architecture. If you include business architecture in enterprise architecture, then I have no problem with that statement. If we basically say enterprise architecture is in, yeah, if it is not IT enterprise architecture, yes, okay, good, great. And so again, we're getting into the semantics, but it's an important issue. A lot of organizations see enterprise architecture as mostly IT, and I don't think that's the right view. It should be the whole picture with everything else that you have to implement as well. But there's interesting models of organization and skills and competencies and people and things like that as well. There's also things like policy charters and business rules. So you've got to look at all of it. That's really my point. You really have to look at all of it. So another thing we see is people sort of get into modeling for what looks like the sake of modeling. We're modeling because we build models. That's what we do. And we try to bring everything down to an equivalent level of detail. Everything's going to go to level 3. And, now it looks like architecture is just drawing a bunch of pictures and models. And by the way, quite often people in the business have this perception that all we're really doing is drawing a bunch of diagrams, and they don't really see the value of doing all of that. Well, we need those abstractions. And as George Box said in 1967, I think it was 87 to 67, one of those years, where he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I think that's really the point here, is that the model is only an abstraction, it's not the reality, but it's easier to work with than playing with the real world. So, so basically then, are all models, do they all have to go to the same level of detail? Do you have to drill them all down the same, or can we do something a little better than that? So, so if I sort of look at two kinds of models, one I'm going to look at the process architecture stack, which includes core business, guiding the business, and enabling the business. And I'll also start to look at something like some of the capability maps as well. This is all top level, level 1. This is all top level. So the question is, do I need to get everything down to level 2, 3, 4? And if you think about it, even if I just had 10 boxes at each level or 10 items at each level, I go to the second level, now I'm going 10 by 10 is 100. If I'm going to another level, now I'm at 1,000. If I go to one more, I'm at 10,000 things. It's too much. And so what we would recommend very, very strongly is make sure we have the full picture at the highest level. So we basically call this kilometer wide, centimeter deep. And then you can drill into, for the ones which are priority, if you've done your prioritization properly, then you can then pick which areas you're going to drill into. But everything you drill into is connected to the top. So up here, for example, this process, establish and enhance the customer relationship. Next level, marketing approach, acquire the customer, onboard them, fulfill orders, strengthen the relationship. Now, each one of these can also go down deeper. But this would imply that I've looked at all of it and said, this is where I'm going to play for the next year. So I can still have an architecture which has no holes in it. I just may not have all the depth that I need. So I would rather say, get something highly done and then drill down on part of it so I can actually start to show value that the architecture is not its own purpose. It actually has an intention of making a difference. I can do the same thing over here. Maybe I can drill down on some of the capabilities, the ones I'm going to need for a particular purpose. So hopefully, I mean, in my illustration, they're not in sync, but hopefully these capabilities are going to be in sync with these value streams that I actually have down here. So I really want to see all of it first, and see how it all hangs together. That way, if we decide to do anything at the detailed level, we know exactly where to plug it. And as opposed to in other words, we should start working on creating value in what's taking place. Do you have any comments so far on this one? So the point is, the models are a means to an end, which is to create value, and we should be focusing on the ones which will create that value. Anyone? This is not controversial, I hope.
Give everybody a second to find their keyboard.
It's right in front of you, by the way. Okay.
Nope, not so far. Okay.
I got lots to go through, and we can open it up to you guys as well. One of my favorite ones. We do Agile. We don't need business architecture. It's just going to slow us down. Jason, ultimately we'll get there. There are lots of people using enterprise architecture more broadly, but if they're doing that, they have to have all these components of the business architecture incorporated in that scope. All right, we do Agile. We do not need business architecture. You're just going to slow us down, and it's almost like there's a culture war around this. I'm working with a Vancouver-based organization right now, and they've just hired an outside firm, and they're paying them $20 million a year for 3 years to completely ignore the architecture and just go out there and start building out Agile software a bit at a time. My concern is that if we do that, how do we know the pieces are going to fit? Now, this is just one type of model we tend to use. So this is called an IGO chart: input, guide, output, enabler. And so what we've done here is look at all the things that come into this is a process. Actually, this is a value stream for this organization. So in this particular case, they look at the inputs, they look at the outputs, look at all the things which guide or control or constrain what's taking place, and they look at the resources that need to take place. And one of the things they've done at this level is then saying, well, let's heat map this. So if I look at this and say, well, okay, if I don't worry about what's next, and I don't worry about where things came from, then I can improve this, or I can build this Agile solution around this particular area. But I can't fix in here the sourcing of poor information. And I cannot deal with the implications of having, it says here, up-to-date forecast. If it's a red and it's not up to date, then all these processes are going to suffer as a result of it. The point is, when we do Agile, we have to be really, really cautious about unintended consequences. But if I don't understand, this is just one example, but if I don't understand the implications of what I'm doing on everything else, and if I don't worry about my data having integrity and having one creation, as opposed to creating that data at 25 different places, because I've got 25 different Agile projects coming on board at some point in time. It's the fit, it's the unintended consequences. If we have a good business architecture, then those Agile teams are much better equipped to do their work and to make sure that what they're producing will fit in with everything else that's taking place. Now, is this controversial? I know, I mean, I have these discussions all the time with organizations who think they can just, go out there and have, 5, 10 teams knocking stuff off from a software point of view. What's the integrity? Where's the master data management? Where's the assurance that I create things once and not 5 times? What's the implication of changing a business rule, which is going to be used in 4 or 5 different places. It scares me, I must say. Now, maybe I'm overly skittish, I don't know. So what are your thoughts on this, right? Okay. Ray,
Roger, you'll see a question that Ray had for Kevin, and Kevin responded, so that wasn't really related to
okay.
What's going on. Yeah.
No problem. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else on this one? Does this make sense to you? As architects, does this concern you? That we doing agile development, doing agile DevOps without some framework of fit, some sort of context, I think is very, very risky for organizations. And I think that we're starting to hear case studies where that was the case. And you know, good luck with data quality. Good luck with knowing the implications of shared components, shared services, shared this, that, and the other. Does each one of them reinvent identity management because we need it, right?
There's a comment from Richard. I'm not so scared if it is features within an existing capability envelope, although, of course, someone needs to inspect and make that decision.
Right.
And then Cecilia says, yes, total sense. Just experienced a project where architecture was not defined up front, total disaster. Riley says the same could be said for AI or ML, lots of attraction to buzzwords, but they require careful thought to implement.
If I can just touch base on that one for a moment. My same client in Australia, in their strategy process, but I didn't mention this earlier, in their strategy process, one of their measures is the percentage of processes or value streams, the percentage of value streams that have artificial intelligence built in. And there's a KPI on the organization that says we will attempt to have artificial intelligence, machine learning built into every process we have. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the ends becoming, sorry, that's the means becoming the end. And so people are scrambling now to put AI into all their processes because they're going to be measured on it, not because they need AI, right? This inversion is a really good point, Riley. And sorry, Cecilia. Agile just to build solutions effectively, but Agile isn't addressing the real business. Okay, so we're on the same page here. But it's really, really hard to talk people out of the idea that all they need to be doing is Agile software development because it's going to be faster. You're going to pay downstream if it doesn't fit. I agree with Richard's comment. If it's within the envelope of a particular capability, you know what it is, great. But you need to know what the capability what its intentions are, and what does good look like with regard to all that. So I'm just arguing here for context of everything we do. The architecture should give us good context, and then we can go crazy developing the bits and pieces with confidence. We know how it goes. Ray, you asked a question, what are the dots? The dots are the assessment of the quality of that information item. So the customer forecast coming in is poor. Now, why? It may be out of date, it might be wrong, there might be a bunch of reasons why. The list of open orders is not reliable, we can't use it. But the actual sales data is good. So it's when we see reds coming in, what we actually figure out is the process preceding it is not working well, and therefore it needs to be looked at. And if you see reds going out, it means the people receiving all of that information can't trust it. So we tend to use the data quality as an assessment, because if I've got, for example, and Gail who's on the call knows this quite well. If you have reds coming in, it's really hard to get greens going out. And Gail coined the expression bleeding red when we did some of this work for an organization much earlier. And the challenge is stop the bleeding. And how do I stop the bleeding? I have better processes. I have optimal capabilities, and I make sure I've got data quality. So all three of those are required in order for us to confidently go into an agile initiative as we're sort of going forward on all this. So.
And Roger, not sure if you saw Mark's comment there at the end.
No,
Agile is just a methodology to build solutions effectively. But if the solution being built in Agile isn't addressing real business pain points, it doesn't matter the methodology that's used. BA can help identify these so the solution has maximum business value.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, now the next one is, well, we're doing something, whether that is, whether I'm doing process architecture, capability models, maps, I'm doing data quality program, I'm trying to improve our performance reporting, whatever it is, any one of these, these are just 4 possible domain models. So therefore, we're doing business architecture. So let me just come back to this picture. What we're saying here is, it could be that you decide that you're a very process-centric organization. Depending upon your industry, that might be quite appropriate. It could be that you're really trying to get your data act together. So therefore, I've got a data quality program. Maybe I'm dealing with master data management and those types of things. It could be I've got a capability map, or it could be that I'm focusing on our performance. The one that I see the most in terms of the myth here is the one that's right here. I see so many people who think a capability map is business architecture. And it's, in my strong opinion, it's an important component of the business architecture. But if I don't know the value streams that those capabilities are supporting, which is just, again, I'm going to say it's just a level of process, and we'll come to that in a moment. If I don't know the information that's required for these capabilities, or what it's acting upon, and if I don't know how I'm going to measure things, then a capability map is just a capability map. And I've seen this so many times. People think that it's only about this, and it's not. It's about all of it. So you're architecting the business. You're not just architecting business capabilities, because what that says is, if you're focusing on capabilities alone, and I'm picking on capabilities right now, it's true for the other ones as well. If I'm only focusing on capabilities, then I'm focusing probably more on the IT view than the other views, even though a good business capability includes much more than all that. Okay, all right, so there's a couple of good comments there, and as I say, this debate of process-centric versus capability-centric, I have learned not to argue this. I don't care which perspective you want to take first, but you can't do one without the other, in my opinion. This is okay.
I do want to make sure we read them out, because if anybody watches the recording afterwards, you don't get to see what the comments are.
Oh, so good point. Good point.
So Riley says, especially painful when the different models and systems which implement them have little to no interoperability.
Right.
Mark says, without the context of value streams, the BCM is just a standalone tool without much value.
Right.
Araya says, in the debate of data versus process focus and the recent digital focus, can we capture business performance metrics without a process-centric approach?
Ooh, that's. And I'm going to say to that, I'll deal with that one. I'm going to say yes and no, because when the way we're doing performance these days is we're looking at the outcomes of value streams for stakeholders. That's really important to understand what's successful for the recipients. But every business concept can be measured. I can measure how many queries do I get or how many problems do I have listed, right? How many problems, by what type, and so on. So even the data itself almost has like a metadata view, which says I'm gathering measurements, which is data about the data. So there's some truth to what you said. I wouldn't depend on it exclusively, but more and more we're basically measuring the process stack and the data stack, both of those. What we're finding is hard to measure a capability. without using the capability. So if that capability is used to do work, then when it does that work, if I've improved the capability, I should expect any place that uses it to get better performance. So even though I want to make sure I know the capability can do the right things, a great capability should end up in a great value stream. And one of the important things is we talk about connecting the dots. Right now we're talking about collecting these different things, but the connection between value streams, processes, and capabilities is absolutely essential, because what I want to be able to do is create one capability one time and use it in as many places as it makes sense, as opposed to creating redundant versions of the same capability. It's one of the biggest advantages we have with business architecture, is to sort out what are we going to invest in, because I build the capability. I'm going to build out the capabilities in here, but I'm going to execute those capabilities when I do work. So that connection is going to be an important one. And I'm actually going to come back to that as well. So after that point, Cecilia, there were others as well, right?
Yeah, there were a few other comments. Mark, capabilities don't resonate with the business. Value streams do. BCMs. Sorry, go ahead, Roger.
There are people who would actually disagree with that statement, but I agree with it. But when you get into organizations like National Defense in Ottawa, National Defense talks a lot about capabilities. But one of the things I would say is I actually see a difference between a strategic capability, which is down here, and a functional capability, which is sitting over here. So the idea that says we have to be able to acquire competitors is a really important thing to say. But that's not the same as saying identity management or know your customer or onboard, like onboarding and things like that. So, but this is definitely more detailed, more specific. I can build things more easily here, whereas these strategic capabilities might be more just general programs that you're going to have to launch. So the word capability is a difficult word for some people, and for others it's not. I mean, you know, make sure that in the organization, if you're talking capabilities, you're really clear what you mean and what context you're using it in. Next comment.
Yeah, in the interest of time, we'll go through some of these quickly.
Okay.
BCMs are really only useful to express the current state of maturity, other maturity measurements to senior executives. Richard commented, value streams represent real operational capability.
Yeah.
BCMs are just building blocks to build operational capability.
All right. So the important thing is, if you look in the dictionary and look up the word capability, you'll find it will say, it'll talk about the ability to achieve some end, right? Or to accomplish some purpose. So it's an ability. But if you can build capabilities you don't need. You can build capabilities that are not useful. You can build capabilities which are very impactful. And so we're also going to look at that aspect in just a moment as well. So maybe I should just keep going.
Yeah, maybe we should keep going because there's lots of comments. Which is great.
Talk about this all. Now, this is another thing too, and I'm not sure if this is a myth, but it's a recommendation. Concept models. Concept models are semantic models, models of meanings, models of language, models of what our business is all about. And so I've just thrown one in here from one we did very recently for purchasing and so on. This is only a part of the bigger concept model. And really what it says is, what are all the terms we use to describe things? So here I've got suppliers. So what's a supplier? What is an offer? Request for supply. So these are all important aspects of things we need in the business. So in this particular case, there's a request for supply must have a source of supply. So prior to all of this, somebody has established sources of supply. So, and this is just the meaning among the concepts. This is not a process model, okay? So for example here, request for supply says must have a source of supply. That doesn't tell you the process for it. There's some processy things in here, but basically this is a semantic model and not a data model. It's extremely highly conceptual. But what we want to do here is make sure that we understand all the things we have to manage, all the things we have to know about, all the things that are going to be important to us. And what we, as in our architecture practice, we've moved this to the very beginning after we understand the stakeholders, because my information and data models need to be derived from this. And it's generally accepted that if you're building capabilities, yes, they're serving value streams, but they're built around these concepts. I have an offer management capability. I've got a supplier management capability. I've got a payment capability, right? And so these are the things we have to manage. Therefore, I need capabilities to manage them. The other thing we find is they even impact our processes, because if I've got something such as an offer, well, there's processes to basically request offers, to review offers, to accept offers, and so on. So there's activities we conduct which are out there as well. As I said before, I can measure these. How many offers do I get? How many offers end up in a statement of work rather than going directly to a purchase order? I can start to do a lot of measurement on each one of these items. And our business rules are the constraints on these lines. They are basically, if you have a good concept model, you can develop really, really well-formed business rules. And if you want to get into this space, look at all of Ron Ross's work. He's got some really good literature on all the stuff these days, and so on. So a good question here is, it says here, for example, a supplier proposal. If I want to get an offer, can that be just a quotation? Under what conditions is it just a quotation of price? And under what conditions do we have to go for a proposal? And so there's constraints and rules associated with all of this stuff here. So the concept model I think is really, really important. The data people should be happy about this. The author, Richard, it was Ronald Ross, and he's got some really good, interesting things. I'm going to pull one out right now. And for example, he's with an organization called Business Rule Solutions, and this is his latest. Okay, and it's called Business Knowledge Blueprints: Enabling Your Data to Speak the Language of Business. Really, what he's saying is it's about concept modeling, and there are proper notations for this. Some of this is reflected in some of the work that has ended up in object management groups, like Semantics for Business Vocabulary and Rules. They call it SVever for short, is a standard which is supported by OMG as well. So you can get a lot of that stuff in there. So anybody, Kevin, thank you. You can do concept models in QualiWare. Kevin, always the plug, but great response, because what that shows is that there's a need out there, and people do this kind of work as well. But how many times have you done a project or done an initiative, and you get down to implementation, and then all of a sudden you find what you thought the meaning of something was very different than the people who are going to receive this solution afterwards. It's always going to come out, but you want it to come out early. I'd rather have a fight about, and in this particular case here, we had a big fight over a vendor versus supplier. People are saying they're different things, and the vendor is not a supplier, is not necessarily a vendor, and neither one of those is necessarily a source. So we spent a few days getting that settled before we came in and started to define the solutions and the process models and the technology requirements. We settled on supplier, but we had to really explain what that meant and define all these terms in some sort of dictionary. It's going to help you through all of this for your communication. Cecile, any big ones there?
I think not. We had one comment from Riley. Enterprise ontologies come to mind.
Yeah,
hugely important for interoperability, standardization, and knowledge sharing.
This is exactly what we're trying to do, we're trying to get the ontology right. Except I would never say to a business person, I would ban you from using the word ontology when you're talking to a business person.
Yes, please.
So it's the semantic for the semantics, right? So next one. This is one of my favorites. And this has been around for a long, long time too. If you decompose a capability, you will find your processes. And this is sometimes expressed as, which is also false, capabilities are what and processes are how. Now, that comes back to what do we mean by capability and what do we mean by process? And so if we sort of look at this one, I would rather see a stack starting with value chains, value stream stages, whatever you want to call them. We call this whole thing the process architecture. And there's lots of issues about arguments over whether you call something a value stream or whether you call it an end-to-end process. But if you look up and down the stack, these are all the activities, and of course in standard decomposition, the things below it are the components of what's above. We do the same thing with capabilities, right? We have capabilities, and so customer relationship management capability has got a whole lot of things going on underneath, right? And then you typically, architecturally, you might see 3-4 levels. Usually 3 is usually quite often enough, depending upon the complexity of your organization. But here's the issue. Let's say I have a process which is not working well. That process employs or calls upon certain capabilities to be actioned. So in this particular case here, it's a red, but if I look, which capabilities am I using? I'm using A.A.A and A.A.B, and I look at it and say, you know what, we're really going to have to make capability A.A.B much better because it's not serving this process well. And if I don't build it out or change it, the process will continue to suffer in terms of its performance. That's fine. So I'll go over here and say, okay, fix this. However, this capability is also used in this other process, which is working just fine. Now, if I go change this for the benefit of 1.1.13, I could easily mess it up for this other process that uses it. So the processes are not a decomposition of a capability. They're both an equivalent stack, but you've got to know the cross relationship. This is the connecting of the dots we talked about. I can do the same thing with data. Data gets used in different ways. I need to cross-reference. The strength of architecture is the connections, right? The realization of a capability instance. All right, so that the capability instance is just a business architecture guild term. They've coined it. And some people use it, and other people don't use it. But yes, oh, thank you, Richard. But it's an interesting concept. But that capability instance might be different for different places, and you're going to have to understand the differences. So don't just go blindly fix something and without being aware of the potential of the impact on other things. So this is the association. And I think this is generally accepted now, and certainly at this level up here, value streams and high-level capabilities can be associated. But even when you go down the stack to the details, you're going to be calling upon these capabilities to get your work done. So this is what we do. This is what we manage. This is what we measure. And these are the things we have to develop, implement, and use. You need both. You can't get away with one or the other. So the argument about process versus capability, to me, is a bogus argument, because you're going to have both. You're going to have to understand each. And ideally, I don't have 7 versions of the same thing when I could get away with one, if I can.
So Roger, Carol actually made a statement/question. She said, I thought processes are derived from a value stage.
Well, okay, the thing is, value stream and value stage is just a terminology. Again, it's a guild, it's a business architecture guild initiated terminology. This idea of stage is for a lot of people is no different than process point 1, point 2, point 3, and they go this way. So I don't disagree with the statement. Just be careful that you're talking to people who understand what you mean by stage. It's not an incorrect statement, but it can be confusing to people who've not been trained on architecture terminology. And for people in the business, we have to be careful we don't have to drag them into our language too much. So I don't disagree. And the thing is, I've got it at this level, but you can actually determine the needs at any one of these levels. But once I've developed the capability, I use it in a process. Now, so what I'm also saying though is a value stream is also a high-level process. And I have clients who basically will not call them value streams. They'll call them end-to-end processes because that's the language that that organization has adopted. So I don't want to get into the terminology battle. I want to make sure though we understand that whatever we do, this is like box within a box. And that's really what we're looking at. I've got another thing coming for that. So yeah, thank you for the observation. I think it's an important one, but I don't want to lose people on the semantics of it.
Okay. So one question, and then I do want to do a quick time check. We're just a few minutes after 2. David had a question. So this implies I have a completely comprehensive set of value streams that cover every fiddly little process in the company. Also that my value streams fit neatly within my value chain.
Well, first of all, let me take the second one. By definition, the value streams will fit within the value chain. There might be very similar ones in different value chains. So for example, if you look at the banks in Toronto, you're going to find wealth management, you're going to find business services, and you're going to find consumer bank. Each one of those has payments. So make payment will show up in multiple ones of those. So they might be identical, or they might be a little bit different. So if that's the case, I can have redundancy in my process maps. I cannot have redundancy on my capability maps. So each one of those processes will call upon maybe the same capability to be used in multiple places. But there is, I mean, in my perfect world, I would have all the value streams identified. I would. But in reality, you may be starting out with less than a perfect match of all of them. So the problem is ultimately we'll get there, but if we're just starting out, we won't have all these figured out, and there's a risk. There's definitely a risk associated with it. So I agree, but we don't always have everything we'd like to have, and we'll have to build them out when we need them.
Okay, great. Okay. There's one more comment. It might be a segue actually for you from Mark. It's a leveling issue. Value streams and stages are very high level processes, but the individual process will inform the business capabilities required to operationalize the value streams. Yeah,
I wouldn't disagree with that statement. I think that that does make sense. And again, I think even with our questions here, we can see that different people are using slightly different terminology for what is essentially the same thing. So, and I'm going to get to this issue about these types of levels in just a moment. This is the next one, right? So basically, it says here, some people say a value stream is not a process, and I would say a value stream is just one level of process. So I don't want to fight that terminology issue. So what we're saying here is, in terms of definition, and by the way, you need to get this figured out. Whatever you settle on is going to be okay, but you don't want different people using different definitions on the terminology. So to me, a value chain organizes all the work required to provide a set of products or services that satisfy a value proposition for a set of like customers in a defined market. So in other words, what that really is a value chain is just a container. It's like that's why I got this picture here. These are all like boxes go in the box, and these boxes go in this box, but everything fits in a box, right? And so what we don't want to do is have the value stream boxes overlapping value chains. They might be very similar from value chain, but I don't want things overlapping. I want it to fit inside. Otherwise, we're going to have an awfully hard time managing it, right? So, and as I mentioned before, like with the banks in Toronto, the wealth management is a different value chain than consumer banking, right? Because you're reaching to a different market with a different value proposition. So if I'm dealing with wealth management, the people have enough money to put a lot on deposit, then I'm going to work with them in a very different way. I'm going to have a lot of advisory, a lot of proactive outreach to them. But if I'm dealing with consumer bank, I'm going to let you basically deposit money online, transfer money from account to account, and basically make sure you know what your balances are without ever talking to you. And that's going to be quite a different proposition. Now, again, I will have some capabilities which are shared across those two value chains, and that's perfectly okay. So again, it makes it really, really hard. But then if a value chain is a container of value streams, here's the difference. The value stream is a set of connected processes, or you could say has stages, that together deliver the expected result of value when triggered. This is the key word. A value stream is triggered. And when it's triggered, it basically then initiates the purpose of achieving the expectation of the people who triggered it. And that could be a click on the website. It could be a phone call to a call center. It could be some event that happens at a particular time on the calendar. But every time it's triggered, there's going to be an outcome. And this is why people use the term end-to-end process as an equivalent of value stream. Again, you use the terminology that's right for you. But then within that, and as somebody mentioned earlier, a business process is the work performed from the triggering event to a closing condition, but it may not be the end-to-end work. And as somebody mentioned before, the processes can be components of a value stream stage. And so it's important to basically say that all of these have a lot of similar characteristics. Work is done, resources are required, and so on. So I think this is an important, I told you this would be controversial, right?
Yes, you did.
Any observations on this? Have I offended anyone?
Can't tell who's madly typing in a response, though. That's the problem. You know how on Teams you can see when someone's typing? We can't see if someone's typing.
Right. So this is another aspect of this. Let's do a couple more, then we can open it up at the end. Okay, this executive strategic intention statements, like, and I see this all the time. Oh, we have our 5 pillars. These are our 5 pillars, what we're going to go for. You know what I see? I see a mixture of ends and means. So now, but the strategic intention should be intention, and then the strategic capabilities should reflect that. And so if I look at this one over here, this is the business motivation model, ends and means. So things like means are mission, strategies, and tactics. Ends are visions, goals, and objectives, right? And I just focus on this aspect of it right now. Most executives and a lot of executive consultants mix these up all over the place. And I see these strategic pillars as a mixture of strategies and a mixture of goal, of end states, all mixed up all over the place. They've not really kept it clear. What I really wanted, what I'm really saying here is, your executives get it wrong a lot of the time, but you're stuck with it, unfortunately. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to understand this, whatever they come up with. I've learned not to go and try to re-educate the executives as to what is a mission and what is a vision. That's not good for career progression. But what we will do is we'll come back and look at the stakeholders and say, what are the exchanged items? And this is like a lot of data coming in and out. What benefit do they expect? What's the value they receive, right? So, I mean, the item might be, I've delivered you an iPad, But the benefit is not, I've got an iPad. The benefit is, what am I going to do with the iPad that I couldn't do if I didn't have an iPad, right? That type of thing. What's the actual experience of dealing with all this? My favorite one of these is when you fly somewhere on an airline, you go to the airport, you give them your luggage, and at the end of the flight, what do you get? Hopefully you get your luggage back, right? So, but the luggage is not the benefit. The benefit is I can now go to that meeting that otherwise I couldn't do. I remember one time I was in Rio de Janeiro working with Brazilian government officials. I showed up with jeans and the t-shirt that I wore the day before. So that was the issue of what's the benefit, is I don't have to suffer that embarrassment. And then there's the experience of the interaction. And so, by the way, here, I don't want to be known as an airline that has incredibly good experience on recovering your lost luggage, right? I want to make sure I don't lose it in the first place. So what is it that's important to our stakeholders, and how do I balance that? And then I'll take these statements and incorporate them more into a North Star, and keeping in mind some of the things over here. So even if you've got those pillars, I'm going to reframe it somewhat and go back and say, we're going to build our architecture, and especially our prioritization, around these main points. So, you know, you can don't go tell your executives that Roger says you don't know what you're doing, but you know, sometimes they don't know what they're doing. So make sure we can actually get it right.
I have a comment from Richard while you were discussing that. He said events cause an issue with the last view. I hope I got that right, Richard, because there was a small little typo there. A student can mark attendance at a lecture, which kicks off a value stream for that piece of data. It gets recorded, enriched, rules applied, which may drive a number of outcomes, examples, flags for welfare, etc. Yeah. This composite view is currently blowing my mind, as it is not a trigger and in and value out. It's a trigger in and multiple value endpoints.
No, that's okay. You can have multiple endpoints. I don't have a problem with that. But usually you don't, until the trigger happens, until you receive something, or some time has happened, or some condition is, and some value in some data object has gone out of limit. You need something that kicks it off. And then at that point in time, you have to understand and there could be multiple outcomes. I don't have a problem with that, right? It's not just one.
Okay.
Okay, so okay, prioritization and heat mapping. I think I have a big issue with so many capability models that I've seen where people said, well, we're doing a maturity assessment. And what I find is what they're actually doing is taking the pain of that particular capability, as an example, and saying it's far from where it needs to be, or it's not as good as it could be. So what capability do I need? And so, and I'm going to tell you a little story, true story, in just a moment on this. But what I'm saying here is there is, how badly broken is it? But there's also how strategically important is it? So if I can do this with processes, I can do it with capabilities, I can do it with data objects as well, or information areas. If I sort of look at this left-right, the column over here says that these are the areas where you have to be world-class. You just have to be the best. It's really important to your mission, to your stakeholders, that you be the best, or you differentiate from everybody else. There's the stuff in the middle where you can't be worse, but being the best does not pay off. This was the Loblaw problem. They tried to take all the stuff that was commodity and just best practice, and everybody said it had to be world class. Well, the customers didn't care about most of it, only about a few parts of it. And there's some things where you just got to get by. And so what I'm advocating here is you have to connect all those things that you're assessing in terms of their strategic value added. Assuming they're all great, in great condition, some of these are more important than others. And I don't want to just improve something because it's up here. So the other way here is this is the biggest gap relative to where you need it to be. And I'm going to tell you a story about this one over here. There's an organization that's it's a Canadian government crown corporation. A friend of mine, when I lived in Ottawa for a long time, we worked in the same department. He ultimately emerged as the president of this particular crown corporation. And so I was going to visit him in his office, and he said, I have to show you what we just implemented. Okay, so I said, well, what is that? He said, and he pulled his phone out, and he basically pulled up a little app, and the app was basically cross-referenced to every single pane of glass on that floor, on the executive floor. And he said, look, he clicked a couple of times, and all of a sudden, 2 of the panes of glass went dark. Wow, that's really, really cool. He said, yeah, it's very, very cool. He said, and it was really, really expensive. It cost us a lot of money to do this. And so I said, well, what problem were you trying to solve? He said, well, in the summertime, it's west facing. So in the summertime, it gets incredibly hot in here, and we needed a way to control it. And I said to him, well, did you ever think about using blinds? But my problem, so the issue here, what I'm really getting at is that, yeah, that particular area that was not in good shape, and they had to fix it. But it wasn't strategically important. Putting automatic dimming glass into the windows didn't help them, because all of their clients never came to the office. And so therefore it was a waste of resources to at best basically go there. But really it was a weak capability that had to be improved, but maybe it didn't have to be improved that much. So what I found is the executives love this page. They love this image because they can see, I need to work on things which are strategically important to us and are lacking in performance. So this is where I put my big bucks. This is where my prioritization is going to go. The stuff down here, yeah, we're going to give you some money to do continuous improvement, but these are where your programs go. And it really gets people away from just fixing the pain, but maybe I can live with some of the pain if it's not that important to our mission and where we're going in the first place. So again, my issue is that don't just do a pain analysis. You have to connect to strategic intention, and your North Star will tell you which things are sitting over here, right? So which things are going to be sitting over in this space and over here. Comments on this? Like I say, this really sells. This really, really sells to the executive, especially if you get the executives to rank the what's world class, what's best practice, and what's just going to be something we'll get by with. Sorry, that was the last one. I thought I saw love there, Richard.
Yes, he loves it.
I mean, I always like getting love from Richard, so that's really good.
You probably weren't getting much love from your friend that you pointed that out to, though.
You know what? I honestly, we were on a competitive curling team at an Ottawa Curling Club for a number of years. We actually were very good, but not quite world class. We were very, very good, and so we had enough abuse with each other going out of town on these competitions. So he could take it.
That's great.
Okay, so a couple more. Okay. Yeah, so Ray, you're absolutely right. The strategic priorities, really what they are is what the North Star and those strategic requirements become. They become the criteria by which you assess whatever object you're dealing with, whether it's processes or whether it's capabilities and so on. Those are you map each one of those other items to those criteria. And you basically then do the math and crunch it and come up with what ranks the highest versus the lowest. If you've got performance data, then the top to the bottom row to the highest row, then if you've got the performance data, I can actually make this assessment very easily, this way, this way, or this way. The important one that you need strategic intention for is this versus this versus this. So yes, they are your decision criteria for doing that. So, and you need to get those criteria. And this is the other key point is, I want the criteria before I start doing this. Otherwise, people just start voting according to what they want for their particular area. So we have to be mindful of it. So measurement. A lot of people think, well, I can just go out and we'll figure out what the measurement is. And they do separate measurement projects to figure it out. What I'm really saying here is that if I look at measurement, measurement is always connected to something else. I'm always measuring something. And what I'm measuring here is I'm measuring the stakeholder relationship, I'm measuring the North Star, and I'm measuring those strategic capabilities. How well are we with all of these types of things? I'm also measuring based upon my capabilities. I'm also measuring against my value streams and processes. And then I'm using all of that to do my prioritization. Once we go live, I'm going to be measuring on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis, whatever it might be. And I'm using that information to make decisions or recommendations about changes on an ongoing basis. So measurement, I can basically build up my measurement stack, and once I'm down to operation, I can connect that back to the items that are important. I can trace it backwards. A lot of people talk about the issue of basically realizing strategic value. Well, if I can define it and measure it, then I can say, well, what measures do I have here which will indicate that I'm getting closer to this or I'm not. So measurement can be associated with the business architecture objects, as opposed to being something which is separate in its own right. So I think that's going to be quite important. Anything else? I've got one more, and then we can discuss some of this. Good methodology can tell us how to do architecture. Now, I think we have a really good methodology in what we've published. We've used it for a lot of years. It's evolved over the time, but blindly following a methodology is a big risk, right? Just going through the steps for the sake of it is not helpful. What we've discovered is that you basically have to do what makes sense. Maybe you know you want to be able to solve a particular problem, and in a perfect world you follow the methodology to the letter, but that's not going to help you. You have to make a difference. You have to pick where you're going to play. It might be a capability play, it might be a process play, it might be a data quality play. It might be in one particular area in the overall business, or it might be the cross all of it. So you're still going to have to figure out how to apply the methodology in a way that's right for you. And quite honestly, I've never seen it done the same way twice. But hopefully you've got things you can work with. And it sort of comes into this expression I like very much. And it says, freedom within the framework. The framework can be helpful, but don't just blindly follow it. And this is like Erich Fromm from back, I think it was in 1936, he said this. True freedom is not the absence of structure, letting employees go off and do whatever they want, but rather it's a very clear structure, enables people to work within established boundaries in an autonomous and creative way. So solve the right problem. So architecture is not just a cookbook. It's a set of things you can use to put together in a very intelligent way to solve the specific problems you're dealing with. If you're doing a digital transformation, you might go after it in a different way than if you're trying to actually implement an ERP system and you need to define what all the changes are going to be. Or if you're trying to actually upgrade your customer experience, it might look different. And so, or if you're, there's a lot of different things you could be doing, and it might vary by business as well. So this is some of the things we might want to look for. Any observations on that? Is that good news, right? Or is it just, by the way, I hope all of this is just common sense, right? And so not so common perhaps. And if you are interested in the book, there's a, I can give you a discount code. You can go, but you go to this site, and you go to this site, and it will still be delivered by Amazon, even if, or you can buy it on Amazon at full price if you like. So you can use that. And Cecile, I'll leave it back to you to talk about some of the training that's coming up.
Perfect, thank you. And I know that there might be some more questions, so that'll give you guys a chance to do that.
Sorry, Richard's just saying, don't say Bob, Richard. I'm very happy about that. No, quite honestly, I mean, I can tell you, you don't write a book to make money. So, because it's the publisher and so on.
That's right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Roger, for doing this. As Roger mentioned, there's some information about his book, and we will include that with the follow-up email that we send out with the link to the recording. Thank you very much, everyone, for your comments and great questions and dialogue today. If you liked today's session, please feel free to share the recording with your friends and colleagues. As I mentioned, we'll be sending that out via email. We'll also include Roger's discount code from his books, and I'll ask Roger for the names of those books that he referenced in today's session, and we'll include those as well. Close Reach is offering a course by Roger in September. It's a 3-day program on business architecture. So please feel free to visit our website for more information about that, and you can get in touch with myself. And last but not least, thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. Again, my name is Cecile Hurley, and our website is closereach.ca. And we look forward to hearing from you very soon. Thank you so much.